Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're taking a look at something that unfortunately never really goes away, bullying.
Yeah, that's right.
But we're not going back to the schoolyard days.
Right.
This deep dive is going to take us right into the world of bullying in 2025.
hmm
And let me tell you, the landscape is different now.
It really is. The playground might be online these days, but the hurt is just as real.
You know what gets to me is how much of it we just don't even see.
Yeah.
One of the sources we're looking at today talks about a grandmother, they call her Yaya, who finds out her grandson broke his finger, like hours after he got home,
Oh, wow.
from another parent. The kid hadn't said anything at all.
That's a perfect example of what makes this so hard to deal with. Kids are suffering in silence. And you know the old just tell an adult
Right.
doesn't always work now. It's not that easy.
It's not. And this source points out how so much of it now is like emotional manipulation and social exclusion.
Right.
That's so much harder to see than, a black eye or something.
It is.
How are we even supposed to stay ahead of this?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? But there are signs. They might be subtle, but they're there. Like, are they suddenly not wanting to go to school?
Okay, yeah.
Any changes in how they're sleeping or eating? Are they not doing the things they used to love? Those are all red flags.
Well, we can't forget about online, right? I mean, all the notifications and stuff kids have to deal with these days, it's anxiety inducing.
It is, and that's a good point. If they're really anxious about those notifications or like quickly closing apps when someone comes around,
Oh, yeah.
that could mean something's wrong in their online world.
Okay. So we're starting to get a sense of what to look for. But how do we, like parents or educators, create that space where kids actually feel safe talking about this stuff? And the source mentions open communication, but that feels kind of vague to me.
It's not as simple as talk to me. You have to make them feel heard and not judged. Make it a habit to check in about their day, but not just about schoolwork. Ask about their friends, what's happening online, how it's all making them feel.
Yeah, like their social life is just as important as their grades. I loved how the source said speaking up isn't snitching.
Yeah.
It's about protecting themselves and others.
Absolutely. We have to change how we think about reporting bullying. It's not about getting someone in trouble. It's about making things safer for everybody.
Speaking of safer, I'm curious about these AI monitoring systems they talked about. Are they actually effective? I mean, it feels like we're getting to the point where technology could almost solve this for us.
AI definitely has a role to play, and it has a lot of potential. Imagine being able to spot cyberbullying patterns before things even get bad.
Wow.
But technology is a tool. It's not a cure-all.
So AI can be helpful, but it doesn't replace us paying attention and interacting with kids. What other prevention stuff does the source say?
Documentation is a big one, especially for cyberbullying. Taking screenshots, keeping records.
I see.
It might seem like a pain, but that proof can really make a difference if something needs to be done.
That's good advice. Apparently, schools in 2025 are a lot better at handling this, but they need the evidence.
Exactly. And remember, it's not just about school. You need a support network outside of that, too.
Right.
Connect with other parents, teachers, counselors. You're not in this alone. And we can't forget about empowering kids through education, teaching them about boundaries, how to be assertive, and safe ways to stand up for themselves and others.
Could all make sense, but we have to talk about the elephant in the room. Technology is what a lot of this bullying happens on, isn't it? It's both good and bad.
Absolutely. Social media and online platforms can make bullying way worse than it used to be, in ways we couldn't have imagined just a few years ago. But the source does have some tips on how to deal with that.
Okay, like what? This is where I think a lot of parents and teachers hit a wall.
Well, first, make sure they're using things like block buttons and privacy settings the right way. Those are basic but powerful tools. And again, those tools are helpful, but they're not a replacement for talking to a trusted adult if something's wrong.
Got it. So we've talked about spotting the signs, prevention, technology. But what if, even with all that, a kid is being bullied? What do we do right away?
The source has a clear plan. The first thing, and this is the most important, listen without judging.
Yeah.
Make them feel safe to share what's going on. Then you take action. Document any injuries, get medical help if you need to, and get the school involved.
I would think that by 2025, most schools have good ways to handle these new types of bullying.
They do. And one last thing, to consider professional support.
Okay.
Sometimes kids need help processing what they've been through, and a counselor can help with that.
Going through all of this, what really hit me was how dangerous the silence around bullying is. It reminds me of Yaya and her grandson. He
Mm,
was hurting and he didn't feel like he could say anything. It just breaks my heart.
it is heartbreaking.
Right.
And it shows that we can't just wait for kids to speak up. We have to create a culture where they feel safe doing that. That means talking openly at home, in schools, everywhere.
We have to go from reacting to preventing. It makes you think, what can we each do to make a world where we don't just deal with bullying after it happens, but stop it from happening in the first place?
That's the big question, isn't it? And I think it's one we all need to be asking.
We'll be right back. To keep going with our deep dive into modern bullying, we'll be looking at even more ways to prevent it and what to do if it happens. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive on modern bullying.
Mm-hmm.
Before the break, we were talking about recognizing the signs and some proactive steps adults can take.
And even though it's 2025, a lot of that stuff is still relevant, right?
Oh, absolutely. Building trust, open communication,
Yeah,
that's always going to be key when you're trying to support kids.
for sure. But what's crazy is how much more complicated it's all gotten, especially with technology. Our sources really go into how social media and online platforms are playing a part in this.
They do.
And it's wild, right? Because technology can be amazing. It connects people, builds communities,
Yeah.
but then it can also be used to make bullying so much worse than it ever was.
Yeah. It really is a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
The source makes a good point about how social media, in particular, creates this sense of anonymity and distance, which can actually make bullies feel bolder and make it harder for victims to get away from it.
It's like online, you lose those natural social cues that you'd have face to face.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you add in the fact that online stuff never really goes away.
Oh, that's true.
Something that might have just been a little teasing on the playground before, now it can stay online forever.
Yeah.
It comes back again and again and just causes more problems.
It's honestly scary to think about how that kind of online bullying can affect a kid's self-esteem and mental health long term.
It's a huge issue. And what's even more worrying is that the line between online and offline is getting blurrier and blurrier.
Yeah,
This source talks about how cyberbullying can spill into real life.
right.
It affects their relationships, their reputation, even their physical safety.
So it's not just what happens on the screen. It can have real consequences that affect their everyday lives.
Absolutely. That's why it's so important for parents, teachers, anyone who works with kids to understand how dangerous cyberbullying is and know what to do about it.
So let's talk about what to do. What are some actual things we can do to fight cyberbullying specifically?
Well, the source points to a few things. Education is always going to be key.
Okay.
We have to teach kids about online safety, being good digital citizens, and the risks of social media.
And we need to start that early, right? I mean, kids are getting phones and tablets so young these days.
Absolutely. It's never too early to start talking about it. We need to make sure kids understand that the same rules apply online as they do in real life. Kindness, respect, responsibility.
It's about taking those values and making them work online too.
Exactly. The source also talks about open communication, just like we talked about earlier.
Right.
You have to create that space where kids feel safe to talk about their experiences online, good and bad.
So those regular check-ins, asking questions, really listening to what they have to say, all of that applies to their online world too.
Exactly. And it's not just about talking. It's about being aware of what they're doing online. What platforms are they using? Who are they talking to? What kind of stuff are they looking at?
That's a tough balance though. You want to respect their privacy, but you also have to keep them safe.
It definitely is. There's no one right answer. But the key is to be open and honest with them, to set clear expectations and boundaries.
The source also mentions some specific tools that can help, like those block buttons and privacy settings we were talking about before.
Right. Those are your first line of defense. We need to teach kids to take control of their online experience and limit how much bad stuff they see.
But like you said earlier, technology is just one part of the puzzle.
Yeah.
We also have to deal with the bigger problems that lead to bullying in the first place, whether it's online or offline.
You're absolutely right. And that's where things like social emotional learning come in.
Okay.
We need to be teaching kids empathy, how to resolve conflicts, how to build healthy relationships.
So it's not just about stopping the bully, it's about making it less likely that bullying will happen at all.
Exactly. And that's a much bigger challenge. It involves a whole system. But it's one we need to face head on if we want to create a truly safe and inclusive environment for kids.
Well said. This brings up another question. What does the future of bullying prevention look like? Are there any new approaches you're excited about?
That's a great question. One of the most promising things I've seen lately is the focus on restorative justice.
What's that? I'm not familiar with that term.
Sure. Traditionally, the way we dealt with bullying was to punish the bully, but restorative justice is different. It's about fixing the harm that was done and rebuilding relationships.
So it's more about understanding and taking responsibility than just handing out consequences.
Exactly. It involves bringing everyone together, the bully, the victim, maybe people from the school or even the families.
Oh.
They have a conversation about what happened, how the bullying affected everyone, and they try to find a solution together.
That sounds really powerful.
It can be. It gives the victim a chance to speak up, to say how they were hurt, and to feel like they're being heard.
Yeah.
And it gives the bully a chance to take responsibility for what they did, to understand the harm they caused, and to make things right.
It's about getting to the root of the behavior and creating a space where everyone can heal.
Exactly. It's still a pretty new idea in a lot of schools, but more and more research is showing that it can really work to reduce bullying and make schools a more positive place.
That's great to hear. Are there any other innovations in this area that you're keeping an eye on?
There are. Some researchers are looking into using virtual reality to help kids develop empathy and understand the impact of bullying.
That's interesting. So they would actually experience what it's like to be bullied, but in a safe environment.
That's the idea. The hope is that by actually experiencing it, even virtually, kids will get a much deeper understanding of how bullying feels and be less likely to do it themselves.
Like virtual reality empathy training.
Kinda, yeah. And I think it shows that we need to keep coming up with new ways to deal with this issue. Bullying is always changing, so our responses have to change too.
I agree. And that's why conversations like this are so important. We need to keep talking about it, sharing what we know, and working together to create a world where all kids feel safe, respected, and empowered.
Absolutely. And even though it's a tough problem, there's reason to be hopeful. We're seeing more and more schools, communities, and people taking a proactive approach to stopping bullying.
And as we move forward, it's important to remember that this isn't just a problem for schools or parents to fix. It's a problem for all of us.
Absolutely. We all have a part to play in creating a culture where bullying is not okay and where every child feels valued and supported.
We'll be right back after a quick break to wrap up this important discussion and share some final takeaways.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've really dug deep into this world of modern bullying today, haven't we? From those little signs that something's off to how technology is changing everything to some really new and cool ways to prevent it. It has been a really interesting conversation. I think what really strikes me is that even though how bullying happens is changing, what stops it is still the same.
That's so true. In the end, it all comes down to communication, strong relationships, and a culture where we're all about empathy and respect.
Right. If our listeners take away one thing from all this, it should be how important it is to break the silence around bullying. The source material was really strong about that.
Absolutely. Remember that story about Yaya and her grandson?
Yeah.
So many kids are hurting, but they don't say anything. They're scared, embarrassed, or maybe they just don't know who to talk to.
And that silence can be so damaging. It lets bullying get worse and worse, and the impact it has on kids, how they see themselves, their mental health, their well-being, it can last a really long time.
So how do we get them to break the silence? How do we make sure they know it's okay to ask for help?
I think the first thing is to create a safe space where they feel comfortable talking. That means really listening to them, taking what they say seriously, and letting them know that they're not alone.
So it's about making them feel like their feelings are valid and that their voice matters.
Exactly. And it's about giving them the knowledge and tools to protect themselves.
Okay.
Things like how to communicate assertively, how to resolve conflicts, how to find resources if they need help.
So it's not just about reacting after bullying happens, but giving them the skills to handle tough situations in the first place.
You got it. And we can't forget about everyone else. We need to be having these open and honest conversations about bullying everywhere. At home, in schools, in our communities.
It's about creating a culture where we don't just deal with bullying, we just don't accept it.
Right. And that means changing how we think. We need to stop thinking of bullying as something normal, something kids just have to deal with to get tougher.
Bullying isn't something that has to happen, it's learned behavior, so we can unlearn it.
I completely agree. And the more we talk about it, the more we make it okay to ask for help, the better we'll be at stopping the cycle of bullying and creating a safer, more supportive world for kids.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I keep thinking about that question from our source material. What can each of us do to create a world where we don't just deal with bullying, but we prevent it altogether?
It's a really important question. And I think the answer is in what we do, both individually and together. Every time we choose to be kind instead of cruel, every time we stand up for someone who's being bullied, every time we teach our kids empathy and respect, we're getting closer to that.
It's about those little things we do every day, those acts of courage and compassion. They might not seem like much on their own, but when everyone does them, they can really change things.
And it's about always remembering that every single child deserves to feel safe, valued, and respected.
Well said. And with that, I want to thank you, our listeners, for joining us on this deep dive into the complicated world of modern bullying. I hope this has given you some new things to think about, some tools to help